2 weeks ago, I posted a video asking, can atheism ground objective morality? It generated over 100 comments on 170 views. That's insane engagement rate. But here's what matters more than the numbers. Some of you raised objections that were too sophisticated to handle in the comments. You deserve better than fragmented responses buried under dozens of replies. Special acknowledgement to @TrumpBellend6717, who posted over 40 comments spanning evolutionary ethics, the is-ought problem, and Old Testament difficulties. To @FeliciaByNature, who critiqued my treatment of secular metaphysics. To @Mike, VALESK8465, who argued for evolutionary grounding. To @Graphili, who challenged my epistemology. To @Appeal to the Stoned, who wrote a breakdown of why objective morality fails. Today, I'm not running from your objections. I'm running toward them. We're going deep. 7 major challenges. No soundbites, no shortcuts. This is the examined question. Hard questions deserve honest answers. Let's examine your questions. We cover the is-ought problem. Can any God ground morality? Old Testament slavery? Evolutionary ethics? And how we know if everyone is wrong. Let's start with the sharpest philosophical objection I received. The most philosophically sophisticated objection came from @TrumpBellend6717. They wrote, morality is prescriptive, not descriptive, and pertains not to what is, but rather what ought be. If you disagree, then please go ahead and define morality and wrong objectively without use of meaningless synonyms or a subjective desired outcome. This is David Hume's famous is-OT gap, and they're absolutely right about the problem. You cannot logically derive an ought from an is. Evolution tells us humans evolved empathy because it aided survival. That's a fact, an is statement. But does that mean we owe UGHT to follow our empathy? That's a prescription. The leap from one to the other requires justification. Just because we evolved a certain way doesn't mean that's how we should behave. We also evolved xenophobia, suspicion of outsiders, sexual jealousy, tribalism. Should we follow ALL, our evolved impulses? Obviously not. So which ones should we follow, and why? The is-OT gap is the chasm between description and obligation. I need to show how Christianity bridges it. Here's how Christianity solves this. Humans aren't just physical objects. We have a telos, a purpose. We are made in the image of God. That's an ontological claim about what humans fundamentally are. When something has a telos, the ought flows from the is. Take a knife. A knife is a cutting tool. That's its nature. Therefore, you owe UGHT to use it for cutting. Using it as a hammer violates its nature. It's wrong in the sense of incorrect use. The ought flows directly from the is because the is includes a purpose. Now apply this to humans. Humans are image bearers of God. That's our nature. Therefore, we ought to be treated according to that dignity. Violating someone's dignity contradicts what they fundamentally are. The commenter challenged me to define morality without subjective goals. Here is my answer. Morality, conformity to the nature and purpose of rational agents as image bearers of God. Wrong, acting in a way that violates the inherent dignity, nature, and purpose of persons. The goal isn't arbitrary. It's built into the metaphysical structure of reality itself. Here's why atheism cannot bridge this gap. On materialism, humans have no telos. We are just the product of mindless evolutionary processes. There is no purpose, just causation. In that worldview, there is no ought. There's only is. When an atheist says you ought to care about well-being, the response is simple. Why? Because it aids survival. So does cruelty sometimes. Because you value it. That's just a preference. The is-ought gap is unbridgeable on atheism because atheism has no telos. Christianity does. Now, someone might object, you haven't proved God exists. Correct? I'm showing that if God exists and humans are made in His image, the problem is solved. Atheism cannot solve it. So here's my question back to atheists. On your worldview, where does moral obligation come from? If you can't answer that, you haven't grounded morality. You've just described preferences. Now, the next objection cuts deeper. It questions whether I'm really talking about objective morality or just smuggling in theology. Trumbullin 6717 responded. Can we ground an objective morality in the nature of any God, or can it only be the specific God that you subjectively believe? This creates a dilemma. Either A and Y God works, which implies contradiction, or only my God works, which implies subjective preference. Here's my answer. Not any God can ground objective morality. Only a God whose nature is actually, necessarily, perfectly good. Evil cannot ground good. Instability cannot ground stability. The Greek gods were petty, jealous, and rapacious. Their nature was immorality. They cannot ground goodness. A deistic God who is uninvolved cannot ground moral knowledge. We'd be guessing. A malevolent God cannot ground goodness by definition. Only the God of classical theism, necessary, unchanging, perfectly good, can ground objective morality. The objection might be, but you're using moral intuitions to judge which God is good. That's circular. Yes, I'm using moral intuitions, but so are you. The difference is, I'm grounding those intuitions in God's nature. You're leaving them ungrounded. We both agree torture is wrong. I say it's wrong because it violates God's image. You say it's wrong because why? There are two separate questions here. Philosophical question 2, which God exists, historical, theological, the commenter, is conflating them. First, we establish that theism is necessary for objective morality. Then we investigate which theism is true. It's like saying scientists can't agree on quantum mechanics, therefore science can't explain atoms. That doesn't follow. We can investigate which God claim fits the description of a necessary good being. Now let me turn this around. Can A and Y moral framework ground objective morality? You say well-being. Isis says honor. Nietzsche says will to power. If you say only mine, then it's just your subjective preference. If you say any of them, then you've made morality vacuous. Honor executions are moral within the honor framework. You face the exact same dilemma. The difference is, I can explain why my foundation is objectively correct based on ontology. Can you? All right, those were philosophical objections. But the next section deals with something much more visceral. Passages in the Bible that seem to contradict the very morality I'm defending. Multiple commenters raised Old Testament slavery and conquest. At Trumbuland, 6-7-17, compared biblical slavery laws to American slave codes. They quoted Leviticus 25:44-46, alongside the Louisiana Slave Code of 1824. Louisiana, the slave is entirely subject to the will of his master, for he is his property. Exodus 21. Similar language about slaves being property, though with restrictions on liquidation. The commenter said, biblical slavery laws are almost indistinguishable from those of the Americas. This is devastating if true. If biblical slavery is essentially American chattel slavery, we have a massive problem. They also challenged the conquest narratives. What warnings had the babies and children failed to heed? If God orders the destruction of infants, what's the moral justification? I'm going to be honest. These are the most difficult texts in Scripture. I don't have perfect answers for every detail, but I'm going to show why these passages, as hard as they are for Christianity, create an even bigger problem for atheism. First, slavery. We must distinguish Hebrew indentured servitude, bankruptcy protection, from foreign slavery, Leviticus 25. Leviticus 25 does permit buying foreign slaves and passing them as inheritance. There were crucial differences from American slavery. No race-based chattel system. Taking the life of a slave was wrong. Kidnapping was punishable by execution. But I'll concede, this system still treated humans as property. That's deeply problematic. We must distinguish between what God commands, what He permits, and what He regulates. Jesus said Moses permitted divorce because of hard hearts, but it wasn't God's design. Similarly, God regulated slavery to limit harm in a brutal ancient context, but it wasn't His ideal. The biblical trajectory moves away from slavery. Galatians 3 verse 28 declares equality. Philemon urges a slave's release as a brother. That's moral progress toward the ideal, not moral contradiction. Now, the conquest passages, these are harder. The context involves judgment on a culture of systematic child sacrifice and brutality. But children's lives were taken. Infants who committed no sin. Here's where I acknowledge mystery. God, as creator, has authority over life that creatures don't. Physical death is not the ultimate harm in Christian theology. Judgment on corporate evil is distinct from individual guilt. I'll be honest, The loss of innocent life is devastating. There's no easy way to process it. I am arguing divine nature theory, not just divine command theory. God cannot command cruelty for cruelty's sake. His commands must align with his justice and goodness. God as creator acts as a judge, which is a different category than a human vigilante. Now, here's the trap. Every objection about these passages uses objective morality to critique them. Slavery is objectively wrong. Taking the life of children is objectively evil. I agree, but on atheism, where does that objective morality come from? Nature dominates the weak constantly. If there's no God, slavery and conquest are just natural behaviors. You're borrowing from the Christian worldview that humans have inherent dignity to critique Christian texts. If God doesn't exist, slavery isn't objectively wrong. It's just distasteful to modern sensibilities. You can't have it both ways. Either objective morality exists requiring God, or these texts aren't objectively evil. These passages are difficult for me, but they are impossible for an atheist to logically condemn. Now let's shift back to philosophy. Can evolution ground obligation? At Mikovelsk 8465 argued that morality is grounded in evolutionary biology. They wrote, these traits, empathy, cooperation, generate behavior that we call moral behavior. This is all objective, as it is a part of nature. They clarified, the definition is descriptive, not prescriptive. It is not about why, it is about is. Their analogy, morality is objective fact, coming from nature, like gravity. Does gravity have obligation? No. This is intellectually honest, but it eliminates morality as we understand it. I agree, evolution explains why we feel empathy. No dispute there. But the commenter admits this creates no obligation. It's just a natural fact, like gravity. Here's the problem. You can't violate gravity. It's a law of physics, but you can violate morality. People take lives and steal constantly. If morality is like gravity, saying you should untake someone's life is like saying you should unlet go of a rock. The distinction between physics and ethics is obligation, and evolution cannot provide it. The commenter said, societies that choose immoral things are objectively immoral. By what standard? If morality is just evolved instincts, and their instincts led to slavery, were they wrong? You can't call them objectively immoral without a standard beyond evolution. Evolution gave us empathy, but also xenophobia and tribalism. All aided survival. When you say follow empathy, not xenophobia, you're making a moral judgment. That judgment can't come from evolution. Evolution explains the feeling. Christianity explains the obligation. Next, epistemology. At Graffili asked, if Nazi Germany was objectively right, how would you know? Their analogy, does vanilla ice cream taste good? Objectively, it would all come down to, do I like the taste? They're arguing, if we can't know objective morality with certainty, isn't it just like taste? First, separate epistemology, how we know from ontology what is true. Ignorance doesn't eliminate truth. We didn't know about bacteria for millennia. They still existed. So, how would we know implies we might be ignorant. It doesn't mean truth doesn't exist, but we can investigate moral truth through reason and evidence. Does a behavior treat image bearers as ends or means? Now the ice cream analogy fails. Taste is preference. Morality is obligation. We don't condemn people for preferring vanilla. We do condemn people for genocide. That distinction only makes sense if morality is objective and taste is subjective. Here's the twist. The question, how would you know if everyone was wrong, presupposes an objective right to be wrong about. If morality is subjective, you can't be wrong. You just have a different preference. By asking the question, you're assuming objective morality exists. So here's my question. On atheism, if everyone agreed slavery was good, would it be good? If yes, you've eliminated morality. If no, you've admitted a standard exists beyond human opinion. Now, at Felicia by Nature called me out for ignoring secular metaethics. You posit a false dichotomy. Ignoring the real, well-developed world of secular metaethics. Fair point. Let's look at Kant, Rawls, moral naturalism, and constructivism. They all face the same problem. They systematize morality but don't ground it. Kant's categorical imperative tells you how to test moral rules, not why rationality is binding. Rawls' veil of ignorance assumes fairness matters. It doesn't explain why we ought to be fair. Moral naturalism argues for human flourishing. But why does flourishing matter? Cancer cells flourish. Constructivism describes a process of agreement. It doesn't explain why the agreement is binding. Every single one assumes moral obligation exists and tries to organize it. It's like asking, where does the standard meter come from? And answering, we use rulers. You've described the tool, not the foundation. The test, was slavery wrong in 1800 before these philosophers existed? If yes, what made it wrong? These frameworks can't answer that. One final objection, the metric system analogy. Trumbullin 6717 argued, our metric reference standards was originally a man-made concept. Yet once it becomes accepted, it functions perfectly. Precisely the same applies to our moral reference standard. We created the metric system arbitrarily, agreed on it, and now we make objective measurements. Why can't morality work that way? This analogy actually supports my position. Can measurement frameworks be objectively evaluated? Yes. If I create a system where 1 meter varies based on my mood, is it equal to the metric system? No. The metric system is objectively better because it is consistent and corresponds to reality. So, for morality, what makes a moral framework better? The commenter says, well-being. But why is well-being the standard? Why not racial purity Nazis or honor ISIS? You can make objective judgments within the Nazi framework, just like you can within the well-being framework. To say your framework is better than the Nazi framework, you need a meta-framework. For measurement, the meta-framework is correspondence to physical reality. For morality, what is it? Christianity's meta-framework is frameworks that align with the nature of reality. Humans, as image-bearers, are objectively better. The commenter's framework is circular. Well-being is the standard because I value well-being. If slavery was good in the 1800s framework, can you say they were wrong? Unless well-being is objectively the right standard, you can't condemn them. Just say they were different. So why is well-being the correct standard rather than power or pleasure? If you say, because I prefer it, it's subjective. If you say, because it promotes well-being, it's circular. After 150 comments and 7 major objections, the fundamental question remains. On atheism, where does objective moral obligation come from? Not evolved feelings, that's impulse, not duty. Not social agreement, that's popularity. Not rational frameworks those describe, they don't bind. Every secular attempt either reduces to preference or smuggles in objective standards it cannot ground. Christianity provides what atheism cannot, a metaphysical foundation for the obligation we all recognize. This doesn't prove Christianity is true. That requires historical evidence for the resurrection. But it shows that if objective morality exists, it requires a transcendent foundation. 2 at Trump Bellend 6717, at Felicia by Nature, at Mike VL ESK 8465, at Graphili, and at Appeal to the Stoned. Thank you. You made me think harder. That's what philosophy should be. Not dunking on people, but examining truth. If you have remaining questions, email me. Here's my challenge to atheists watching. Answer this question. Where does the obligation come from on your worldview? The binding force that makes slavery wrong even when societies endorsed it. The authority that makes genocide evil even when nations practiced it. Where does that come from in a universe of just matter in motion? If you have an answer, I genuinely want to hear it. Pause for a second. Which objection did you think was strongest? Comment below. New videos every week tackling questions like this. Subscribe if you want to think deeply. This is the examined question. Hard questions deserve honest answers.